Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for spending your lunch hour with me. Most of you know I'm Rebecca Murray. I'm the Engagement and Program Manager here at Parks and Trails New York. I'm super excited to be hosting this webinar. Is kind of like a new series that we're trying out this year that really complements the Friends to Friends workshops that we've been doing, because we've realized that on any given day, PTNY and staff are really engaging with this diverse and unique group of stakeholders, but we share so much in common. So for the next 2 years, we want to bring in more speakers on various topics to really thread that needle, to illuminate some of that connectivity and some of those things that bind us together. So hopefully through this, we can kind of learn together, we can learn from each other, and we can continue to push in the same direction. That said, I think everybody on this call is supporting placemaking in one way or the other. Today's topic is incredibly versatile, and as we'll see today, as we will hear from Nate, there's really no right way to go about placemaking. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So for PTNY, we are really supporting placemaking through our programs. We're supporting it through the grants that we administer, through our events, and through our advocacy. We really believe that our state parks, our blueways, our trails are really more than just recreational amenities. They're the gateways. They're gateways to our charming villages, to our bustling downtowns. The communities across New York State, especially those that reside in and around these green spaces, they have so much to offer. I'm someone personally who is seeking out new places to recreate. I need new places to ride my bike. I need new places to hike. But very often after I'm done recreating, I'm drawn into a nearby village, a town. I'm looking for food. I need a place to rest. I need a place to plug in my phone. And I certainly know I'm not alone on this one. I know a lot of the municipal staff on this call can kind of attest to this particular customer. The people who are walking, they're paddling, they're hiking, they might climb or use our public lands in some other way, and they're actively making decisions to spend time and money in places that have these welcoming main streets. They have attractive storefronts. They might have pop-up parks. They have walkable streets. So what better place to spend time in after a long walk, hike, or stroll? So these communities, these places that are making a concerted effort to improve their infrastructure, get additional services, build out their amenities, highlight their community character. These communities are attempting to attract and retain this particular customer, and we deem a lot of these communities trail towns. So trail towns are making placemaking a priority, and sometimes they might not even know that they're doing it, to be honest. So that really kind of brings us to why we're here today, to talk about placemaking. And placemaking is really about like shaping these public spaces in ways that reflect our identity. They're bringing people together. They're creating vibrant, memorable experiences, both for the people that live in these places, but then for visitors that might be experiencing these spaces for the first time. So these changes, they can be big, small. They're really about building stronger communities, all while attracting these people who are seeking these authentic experiences. They're looking for these small town places to complement some of their time outdoors. So there's certainly this monetary value that I think we definitely focus on at PTNY, but there is also this quality of life component that is so important. So this concept is really not new to most of you, and it's certainly not for PTNY. I'm really excited and fortunate to be able to learn from experts, especially like Project for Public Spaces that's operating at the national level to promote this work and help us uncover new ways that we can promote and support placemaking across New York. So with that, I'm really excited to introduce Nate Storring, who's the co-executive director at Project for Public Spaces. He's working alongside his fellow co-executive director, Kelly Varell, and they're helping implement the organization's strategic vision. Prior to this role, Ned led the production of several resources on district revitalization and placemaking in particular. He has a second edition of the placemaking handbook, How to Turn a Place Around, that guides inclusive placemaking, plans and improvements to innovation districts, and how to balance transportation and placemaking along main streets. He's also the co-editor of 2 books on participatory city building. And with that, I would love to welcome Nate Storring.
Awesome. Thanks so much for the introduction, Rebecca. Thank you for having me, and thank you all for being here.
I'm actually very passionate about this topic. So just a little bit about me. I am indeed the executive director of Project for Public Spaces, but also I'm a Trail Towns guy. So I actually live in a town called Lambertville, New Jersey. It's about 4,000 people, right on the Delaware River, and we have a fantastic trail system. So the Delaware and Raritan Canal towpath connects us to a bunch of other towns in the area, and it's actually part of my daily routine to walk this path on my lunch hour to just get out, get active, and have a little bit of that sort of psychological support so I can come back refreshed to continue my day. So yeah, this is kind of near and dear to my heart, and I'm excited to talk about it with you all today, and what placemaking really has to do with trails. So before I dive in, a little bit about Project for Public Spaces. We are indeed a national nonprofit organization. We're actually celebrating our 50th anniversary this year. Since we were founded, we've worked in 3,500 communities around the world, all 50 US states. And really what we provide is on the ground planning, design, community engagement assistance to communities to help them improve their public spaces in collaboration with all sorts of different stakeholders. We also provide training, and we provide conferences as well, so that you can kind of continue your career in placemaking and continue to learn more, meet other folks that are doing this work, and so on. So to start things off, I think it's important to back up a little bit and actually answer the question, what is placemaking? Because I feel like it's a word that gets thrown around a lot. We've all probably heard it, but it can be used in a whole bunch of different ways. So I think it's important to kind of ground us in what it's all about. So, you know, when we think about placemaking, probably what you're thinking about immediately is the transformations of public spaces, like this one. This is an underpass in San Antonio, Texas, that we worked on, and we were able to work with high school students, college students that are on either side of this big barrier to transform it into a place for them to actually hang out, right? And it's actually kind of a series of basics, right? It's like basketball court, some ground murals to make it a little bit more colorful and inviting, and some seating to make it social and a place where you can actually spend time and linger, right? You might think about a project like this. This was in Atlanta, Georgia. It's a transit plaza that was just kind of a classic brutalist space that was really just a pass-through for folks that were taking the transit system there. And we were able to work with Midtown Atlanta to turn it into a platform for the arts, right? So this is managed by them on a regular basis. We helped come up with the design, engaged an artist to do a mural. We brought in that shipping container you can see in the middle that's actually busts out a stage when it's time to perform, but also stores all of this stuff when it's not in use, right? So some basic changes can really transform the use of a space and people's relationship with it, and that's really what it's about. Or if you have some more time, you could do a project like this. This was we've had a 20-year relationship with downtown Detroit starting in 1999.
I lost my mind.
When this intersection basically looked like a traffic circle with this soldiers and sailors monument in the middle of it, right? And over the course of 20 years, we were able to work with local stakeholders to transform it into this. And today, this is USA Today's #1 public square in America, Campus Martius. As you can see, it's like, it has, of course, some plaza elements, right? Seating, all of that good stuff. But seasonally, they actually build a beach all summer next to that Soldiers and Sailors Monument where people can come and gather and get a little taste of the Upper Peninsula right in downtown Detroit. But I think that the thing that's important to understand about placemaking is there's all the stuff you see on the surface, right? Those like fun before and afters. The physical changes, the changes in use, right? More people actually in the space. That's all an important part of placemaking. But there's also a lot of stuff below the surface that you can't see in a photo. And that stuff is just as important to the success of placemaking as all that stuff that's on the surface. So we have to also think about the process that got us there, right? And also how that space is cared for on a regular basis, because that's the community part, right? That's where you actually build those relationships between people and the place, and between people and each other. That really is the so what of all of this. It really is important to think of these places as part of our social infrastructure, and the process is part of what makes it so important for that. So finally, to an actual definition. This is one of my favorite definitions of placemaking. It's from a book from 1995 called Placemaking: The Art of Building Communities. And in that book, the authors say placemaking is the way that all of us as human beings transform the places in which we find ourselves into places in which we live. And the thing I love about this definition is that it points out that actually placemaking is something that we're all doing all the time. It's not something that only architects, only designers are able to do, or only city planners are able to do. We're actually doing it in our daily lives all the time. So you think about the place that you live, right? Whether it's your home or it's your apartment, you're constantly thinking about how can this place be a little bit more useful to me? How can it be a little bit more meaningful to me, right? You're making little changes, you're renovating things, and over time, you actually transform these places. So this is a great example from New Orleans, right? 2 townhomes that were built in 1857 that were completely identical, and over the course of more than 100 years, they transform completely. They're a different shape. They have different decorations, right? The insides are probably even more different than the outsides, right? That's placemaking. So we're actually doing this all the time. But the problem is that when you start looking at public space, it gets really complicated. And you all know this better than anyone, right? You have all of these different jurisdictions, all of these different stakeholders involved, right? Whether it's DOT or it's Parks Department, city planning, private property owners, nonprofit organizations that maybe manage the space. And I think the risk of having all of these different entities involved is that sometimes the placemaking that we actually all know really intuitively how to do can kind of fall through the cracks. And these places become less than the sum of their parts rather than more than the sum of their parts, right? They just become a collection of amenities, but people don't have any connection to them, right? They don't feel passionately about them. So how do we bring that placemaking, that intuitive placemaking thing that we all do, we all understand, into the public realm? Well, it requires a little bit more intention. So that's where Project for Public Spaces comes in. When we're doing this work in public space, this is how we design, or this is how we define placemaking. It's a community-based process of visioning, experimentation, and care to change the way people use and experience a public space. So again, it's a process, right? You're never actually done. It's an ongoing process of kind of evolving these public spaces. It involves visioning, so you do actually need to come up with a direction with the community. And it involves experimentation and care, right? You're never done. You're going to try something, see whether it works, try another thing, and always be caring for those experiments over time. And ultimately, the goal is to change how people use and experience that space, right? So that there are more people there, right? Spending time, patronizing local businesses, all of that. That's an important outcome. But also just their perception of the space. Does it feel safe? Does it feel like it's for them? Those are important in terms of when you start thinking about how do people decide where they live, right? I moved to Lambertville because I feel a connection to this place. It's not just that it has some great amenities, but it feels like me, right? So that's what placemaking is all about. And when you break it down, there are 5 basic steps to the placemaking process. The first one is you have to know where you're working, right? Identify the place, identify the stakeholders. Who are all the different people that have a stake in this public space? We strongly encourage folks to actually evaluate the space and identify the issues in collaboration with community. So don't come up with a vision and then bring it to the community, right? And bring them in at the very end. Bring them in at the beginning to actually start forming the vision together. Then you can synthesize that evaluation, those issues, into a direction for the public space. And then you experiment towards it, right? Experiment towards that vision while building up additional capacity for management of the space, for the long-term improvements that maybe you can't do as a short-term experiment. So I don't have time today to kind of do the full rundown of all the different stages of the placemaking process, but I do want you all to come away with something really concrete that you can use in your own communities. So that's what I'm going to focus on, is how do we evaluate public spaces to really understand whether they're working, whether they're not, and come up with an action plan to actually move towards the vision, right? To get to that sort of before and after some of those ones that I was showing at the very beginning. So again, Project for Public Spaces has a long history in this game. We were founded by some folks who worked with this guy, William H. White, and he was a pioneering researcher in the field of public space who came up with all these observation techniques for understanding how people actually use spaces. And over time, the thing that we realized is that you actually don't have to be an expert to use these observation techniques. Anyone with a little bit of training has the ability to observe public spaces themselves, assess whether they're working or not, and come up with ideas for improvement. It's actually pretty easy. So that's really where we've shifted our focus, is putting those observation techniques in the hands of everyday people to really think about how public spaces can be improved themselves. So just as an example, right, this photo on the right here, take a look at it. What do you see, right? Of course, you see some folks that are sitting on a, patio area of some kind, a sidewalk, enjoying some coffee. But if you look really carefully, you can actually start to see some pretty interesting human behavior, right? So what does that tell us? The trick is, when you start really observing public space closely, and especially people in public space, you start to see some things that tell you about bigger dynamics. So what this tells me is this woman is very comfortable in this public space, right? She's taken off her shoe. Her dog seems pretty comfortable too, right? Rolling on its back, and she's rubbing its belly with her foot, right? That screams comfort to me, and that's the type of vibe that we are searching for in our public spaces. How do you make a public space where someone feels like they're in their living room? And that means that they're going to linger. They're going to be there for a while. They're going to buy another cup of coffee, right? So just quickly in the chat, I want to hear from all of you, because again, we all have a lot of experience living in public spaces in our day-to-day lives. And also, like, you all as professionals in this space have experience. So please, in the chat, take a moment to tell me, what do you think makes a great public space? Feels comfortable and inviting. Places to sit and relax, easily accessible, hearing people talking. I love it. That sort of feeling of you're in a social space. Comfortable seating, absolutely. Meeting with neighbors and friends. Safety, music in the background, shade options, yes. Shady spots. Accessible for everyone of all abilities, well maintained, yes. Absolutely. Yeah, no, these are all great. Water in bathrooms, thank you. Trees and plants, exactly. So like you all know this stuff. Like, this is what I'm saying, is like, ultimately this is not rocket science. And what we've found over years of work with communities and observing public spaces ourselves is that most of these different characteristics that you all are pointing out can actually be categorized in 4 very simple characteristics that make public spaces well used and well loved, right? So they are uses and activities, comfort and image, access and linkages, and sociability. And you all nailed it in terms of hitting all 4 of these categories. But I am going to break them down because I think they're a helpful tool set and way of looking at public spaces that will help you improve them and focus on what really matters instead of just fancy materials, for example. So uses and activities, right? If you ask someone why they're in a public space, most of the time they're going to give you an answer that's a verb, right? They're doing something in the public space. These are uses and activities, and they are the fundamental building blocks of public spaces. So it doesn't matter how nice your public space looks. It doesn't matter how much seating you have. If there's nothing to do in the public space, people won't be there. It's that simple. Now, those uses and activities can be a wide range of things, right? You don't have to build a theme park. But there do have to be verbs in the space for people to be in the space. So, for example, food, right? Food is a fantastic way to seed activity. And that could be a market, it could be a vendor, it could also just be an adjacent business where you have a place where you can actually go sit outside, right? Whether that's private or public. That's a great way to get people into a space. Could be active recreation, right? Anything from organized sports to more casual things like a skate park. Interactive art, right? That isn't just aesthetically pretty, but invites people to actually engage with it and spend time in the space, and maybe even leave their own mark. Uses and activities have to be seasonal, right? I grew up in Ontario, so I know all about that, just like you all do, right? You do need stuff to do all winter long if you expect people to spend time in public space. And that can be things like skating. It can be things like curling, again, showing my Canadian a little bit here. But you do need those things all year round in order for people to actually extend the season beyond just the summertime. Doesn't always have to be recreation either. It could be things that are just meeting everyday needs in your public space, like a farmer's market, right? Or other things. I mean, I know some cities, I think Boston maybe has this, they have a food truck that actually brings municipal services to neighborhoods. That's a good way to actually bring people out into a public space, but also make it easier to access those types of resources. It also doesn't need to be loud, right, or active. There are passive activities that you can do in public space. This is one from my very own backyard, right? In Lambertville, we have an art class that is constantly having people out like painting these amazing paintings of the town, right? And that's a great way to just show that activity in public space without it being like always loud and social and all of that. So as a rule of thumb, Project for Public Spaces, we like to talk about the power of 10. It's a very simple idea when it comes to uses and activities. And it's just that idea that like if you're looking at a human scale place, like for example, this main street, you need about 10 things to do in that space in order to make it really active and lively, right? And ideally, those uses and activities are reaching different audiences, right? Young and old, people of different cultural backgrounds, people who may be in the space at different times of day, right? In order to keep that space active all day long. And when you actually start thinking about that as a nesting doll, that's how you can activate a bigger space than just one park, for example, right? So if you're looking at the far right there, that's kind of like what we were just looking at in that photo. We call that the place level. You need 10 things to do at that level. Now, if you look at a destination, right, like say a big park or a trail, right, you need 10 of those place level things in order to activate that whole destination. So you could think about a trail as a string of pearls, right? You need multiple places along that trail that each have 10 things to do inside them in order to make it really lively and drive that use of the trail. And then once you zoom out even further, you could think about having multiple destinations at the scale of a city or region that ideally are all interconnected. And that's how you can activate an entire town, an entire city. So moving along, comfort and image, right? Another one of the 4 characteristics of successful spaces. And a lot of you called out some of the best like examples of exactly what we're talking about here. This really boils down to, do people feel welcome in the space? From a physical standpoint, from a mental standpoint, a social standpoint, right? Do they have their the bodily needs being met by things like seating or bathrooms? But also, like, do they feel like this space is for them, or do they feel like, oh no, that's not for me, that's for someone else, right? That's really what we're getting into here. So, as many of you pointed out, seating is critical, right? And ideally, a variety of seating, because people like to do different things, right? They like to sit different ways. Not everyone wants to sit on a bench, especially if you're in a social situation. You may want to have seating that's actually facing each other. So a bench is not ideal for that, right? Seating is really a platform for all sorts of different types of uses, right? So again, you can see this woman is lounging, again, with her shoes off, right? She's really comfortable in the space. She's got her magazine or her newspaper that she's reading, and she's kind of taking a break, right? The seating is allowing her to do those uses and activities in the space. Here's another great piece of seating. There are 17 people in this photo interacting with this one piece of furniture, right? And it's because it's 2 backsides deep, right? So you're actually able to have people on the inside, people on the outside. And it's a platform for all these social activities. There are people eating, there are people like looking for directions, just taking a break. There's some shade that's making it a little bit more comfortable in terms of the heat. So there are all sorts of great ways that you can do seating, and then there are ways that are actually intentionally uncomfortable, right? We call that hostile architecture. And the idea is that you're essentially building a piece of furniture that is for some people, but not for some other people, right? So in this case, you have a combination bench/bike rack that is also preventing people from lying down on it, right? And I would say in our experience, typically these approaches are actually more trouble than they're worth. They tend to make public spaces feel uncomfortable and unwelcoming for everyone, right? Usually people can actually see exactly what you're doing, and it doesn't actually make the space feel welcoming. There are other ways to address these types of issues that we strongly encourage in our work, rather than laying down spikes on a surface or making it unsittable. And one reason why we suggest that is that life finds a way. If people want to sit somewhere, they're going to find a place to sit somewhere, right? So again, this is right in my backyard. But like these folks who are driving the taxis and the other car services, they're there all day, and they have found a way to put seating in the space, even though it's not there. Some other factors on comfort and image that are really important to public space: maintenance, right? We never have enough money for maintenance and care of the space, but it's a really important factor in terms of people feeling like it's welcoming and safe, right? All of that. Again, it needs to be seasonal, right? So a lot of you pointed out shade, very, very important in the summertime especially, but in the wintertime too, we have to think about heat, right? And that could be actual heaters, could also be fire. A lot of cities don't allow that, but it's a real attraction in public space, not just because of the heat, but because it's a use in and of itself. It's such a delight to be close to a fire. Again, in the summertime, of course, it's very important to have shade, but water is also a great way to cool down. And especially if you're actually able to touch the water, that again is a nice treat that people will often take advantage of. Access to nature in general. There have been many studies about this, that this actually reduces our stress, right? You can read people's brainwaves, and we know that for a fact that biophilia, as they call it, is a real thing. So whether you're talking about trees or other plantings, or you're talking about water, they all actually add to our psychological comfort in a space, as well as serving ecological functions in their own right. And then again, someone mentioned accessibility. I think often we think about accessibility in terms of getting from point A to point B in the public realm. But if you think about it through the lens of comfort, it unlocks a lot of other ways that we can think about accessibility, right? Can a person in a wheelchair, for example, participate in all of the uses and activities that are available in a public space? Is it comfortable for them to linger there and spend time there, right? But of course, you can think about this in lots of other ways, through the lens of like visual impairment, for example, or autism, where, for example, a loud space may not be comfortable. So it kind of challenges us to think a little bit beyond just ADA as a lens for accessibility, to make it a place that's truly welcoming for everyone. And likewise, seeing yourself and your own culture in the space is a really important lens for thinking about comfort, right? And that could be things like, having multiple languages on signs. It could be things like having festivals and other events that honor the various communities within your community. But it could also be something as simple as the businesses that are on a main street, right? Are there businesses that reflect the full diversity of the community? Those are one of the most important things in terms of people feeling like, yeah, this space is for me. I feel comfortable here. All right, access and linkages. I know I'm preaching to the choir on this one, so I'm not going to linger on it too long. This is really about how do you get to the space, and once you're in the space, how do you get around within it? So as we know, much of our built environment, unfortunately, looks something like this. Maintenance, again, is really tough when we're talking about sidewalks, if you're lucky enough to have them on all of your streets in the first place in America. But what if more of our sidewalks look like this, right? Fully accessible, well-maintained, and as you can see in this photo, also, again, a platform for that sociability, right? People are walking side by side, they're having conversations, they're out with their friends and family, right? Their dogs. These spaces that are, yes, to get from point A to point B, are also part of the lingering and sociability of our public realm. Of course, safe crossings, right? Those are important for safety, but also for connectivity, right? Getting to where you want to go, connecting those destinations. There are many opportunities for pedestrianizing streets in our communities, and actually just unlocking more space for that lingering. Multi-use paths, again, preaching to the choir here, right? But these are great ways to enhance walkability, bikeability. Transit, right? I think one of the important keys around transit is not just thinking about the point A to point B, but Could that transit station be a destination in and of itself, right? Could it be a place where you access those everyday needs, or you spend a little time before or after your trip? Those are great ways to extend the time that people are spending in a downtown or in a public space, and also make the transit that much more useful if you can also do some of your grocery shopping in that space, for example. Once you look down at the level of the public space itself, circulation is a really important lens for thinking about our spaces. And one of the best clues that circulation is not working is what we call desire lines, right? Where people are essentially making their own paths because the paths that were laid out are not actually working for them. That's a great clue that maybe there's an adjustment that needs to happen in the circulation. Again, down at that micro level, wayfinding, so important. And it doesn't have to be expensive, right? This is a great example from Red Hook, where some of the local businesses took it upon themselves to do some great wayfinding that really adds to the character of the neighborhood, while also giving you some direction about where these different businesses are located, right? But again, this is paint and wood, so it's not going to last, but it looks great while it does last, and it's fun, right? We can replace it. It's okay. And finally, the flow of information is also an important thing to think about when we're talking about connectivity, right? Access and linkages. And that might be something like on-site, like an information booth. But we should also think about websites, Google Maps, right? How do people find out about places? Those are all important aspects of this too, because more and more, those of course are part of people's journey to a public space or a downtown. All right, and then finally, sociability, right? Again, a lot of you pointed this out, and I think that's great, because sociability is in some ways the hardest thing to achieve as a characteristic of public space, but it's also the so what, right? At the end of the day, it's why people feel like they have a connection to public spaces. It's why they fondly remember public places from their childhood. It's the places where you go with your family, where you meet up with friends, where you feel like you're part of the community, right? That's sociability. But you have to get those other three characteristics right often before you can even get to that point with the sociability. People need to have things to do. They need to feel comfortable and welcome in the space, and they need to be able to get there in order for it to really fulfill that community role of sociability. So again, how do you know sociability is working? Well, public displays of affection, right, are definitely a sign that people are feeling comfortable in a space. Maybe they want to show off a little, but when you see that in a public space, it's a good sign that it's actually working well, right? When we think about sociability, it's like these spaces can be platforms for parenting or learning, right? They don't just have to be, a place where you go get lunch. You can do all sorts of things together with your family or your friends in a public space. They can be places where sociability happens within various demographic groups, like a place where guys hang out and play dominoes, right? In New York City, we often talk about the ping pong tables at Bryant Park. Have an amazing community about that surrounds these ping pong tables, to the point where someone actually made a documentary about it, right? But very simple things can create a community around them in a public space. And again, coming back to Lambertville, where I live, October is a big month for us. We have a big Halloween celebration, but as part of that, we actually do a Halloween dog parade that always brings out hundreds of people. And again, this is an example of a public space serving as, I didn't know everyone that was at this event, but I feel like I'm part of the community by attending it. Sociability is also has other functions that maybe are more fundamental than we sometimes give credit for. So I was talking earlier about hostile architecture and our attempts to often keep people who don't have housing, people who have mental health challenges or addiction challenges out of public spaces. There are alternatives to that are effective. Again, we have the data, we know it works, but a little bit different. It's not about forcing people out. So this is an example from Times Square in New York. We worked with a local social service organization called Fountain House and the Times Square Alliance to build what we call the recharge station. And basically what this is it's a kiosk that is staffed by a member of Fountain House. So this is a person who has lived experience with addiction or mental health challenges or living on the street. And they offer free coffee. They offer warm blankets and things like that in the wintertime, offer access to games and also just company to folks who are spending most of their day in Times Square. And surrounding this kiosk is actually seating, right? You can see the bar seating that's right up against that kiosk, but you also have tables and chairs where people do spend most of their day. But the idea is that those folks are actually building a relationship with that person behind the kiosk, and when they're ready, that person can connect them with housing, with programs to help them kick their addiction or address their mental health challenges. And often that relationship is really what's needed. That's the gap that needs to be filled in order for those folks to seek help and break out of their circumstances. So again, sociability can be really powerful and actually meet people's everyday needs. It's not just warm and fuzzy. Likewise, this is another project that we worked on in Mexico City, and it's a place called Foro Lindbergh in Parque Mexico, and it was a great public space project, really fun. We had a library on site, we had chess tables, and someone came and taught people how to garden. A great public space project, but again, speaking to the power of sociability, when there was an earthquake in Mexico in 2017, that public space became a hub for resilience during that earthquake. It became the place where everyone instantly knew to go in order to access, the things that they needed, right? You can see ice there, you can see toilet paper there, you can see information, right? And so when these spaces become the heart of our communities, when we really need them in a flood, in a heat wave, they switch gears and can become these engines of resilience. So again, don't sleep on sociability. It's not just warm and fuzzy. It's actually a really, really important part of our infrastructure. So those are the 4 characteristics of successful public spaces. The really cool thing about these is that you can actually break them down into qualitative metrics that you can hear, for example, when you're doing community engagement or you're interviewing people or doing focus groups. That inner circle or that inner ring that you're seeing there, those are words that you might hear people say that are telling you about that characteristic in public space. If people say a public space is fun, they're probably talking about uses and activities, right? If they say that a place is walkable, right, they may be talking about access and linkages, or they may be talking about comfort and image, right? So you can kind of read between the lines of what people are saying to understand how they're feeling about the space. And of course, you can also use quantitative data, right? Anything from retail sales to crime statistics, sanitation ratings, modal split, all of these different sources of quantitative data to also tell you about these characteristics and whether or not they're working in your public space. The other cool thing, and this is the last chunk that I'll leave you with, is you can use this idea as a tool for community engagement. So this is something that we often use in our placemaking process. We call it a placemaking workshop. And what we do is we invite members of the community to use the lens that I just walked you through as a way to evaluate a public space themselves. We call it the place performance game, or just the place game for short. So on the front, you could see that we have the diagram, and on the back, we have a simple rating system, and then some follow-up questions that invite people to observe the space. How is it working? How is it not working for them? What are other people doing in the space? Are they enjoying it? And then think about, like, what would they do to improve the space and address some of the issues they're seeing. It invites them to go talk to someone else in the space, a stranger, right? And ask them about their experience, right? So it's a very simple, fast community engagement tool that gets people a little outside of their comfort zone, right? Instead of just saying, this is what I want, this is what I don't want, what about my parking space? The things that you often hear in public meetings, it challenges members of the community to actually get out in the space and really dig in and think constructively about how it could be improved. So I won't necessarily go through all of this in detail because I want to have some time for questions and discussion, but you can do this in about half a day. At the minimum, we suggest giving a little bit of a presentation like what I just gave in order to set people up. You break people up into groups, go to different parts of a public space, do the observation independently, and then they come back, they share their observations about the place with a group, brainstorm some short-term and long-term improvements, and then report back to the broader group. And you can use that raw information as the basis of a vision for that public space. Of course, with other types of research and expertise mixed in order to sort of get it over the finish line. But it's a really good starting point for bringing the community in early on in the process, again, before you already have a vision for a space. So again, this fits in right in that early phase of evaluating the space and identifying the issues with the community. But again, it's part of that broader placemaking process. So next step, you can translate it into a vision and then actually, get going on it, right? Start experimenting as fast as possible. Start making some change in the public space. So that's basically it for me for now. 3 quick ways that you can stay involved with PPS. We have some upcoming events this fall, including an in-depth placemaking training that will get into all of the further details of like, how do you really do this? Like, how do you actually get those designs made? How do you manage these public spaces? How do you fundraise for these things? We'll touch on all of that. We have a webinar coming up and a screening in New York City. So I encourage you to check those out. You can find out more at pps.org/events. We have a conference coming up as well next year in Detroit. Really excited about that. This will be our 5th International Placemaking Week. Great way to meet other folks in this field. Again, all stripes. There will be people from the public sector, private sector, nonprofit sector, all doing this work, working with communities to improve public space. And then finally, we do have a grant opportunity that will be opening very soon called Community Placemaking Grants. You all, I believe, will be eligible for this. New York State is one of the areas in the geography, the eligible geography. You have to be either a public agency or a 501c3 nonprofit in order to be eligible. But these are going to be grants focused specifically on road safety and mobility hubs. So you all should be probably pretty well suited for this. You get $100,000 of implementation funds, wraparound design, community engagement, and implementation support from our team, and access to that training and that conference that I just showed you as part of this grant. So keep an eye out for that. You can find out more on our website. It's not posted yet, but it will be hopefully in the coming week. So really encourage you all to check that out and apply. We're really, really excited about this opportunity. That's it. I'd love to open it up to Q&A. Feel free to either drop a question in the chat, or if I believe you're also allowed to come off mute or put up your hand, come off mute and ask a question as well.
Yeah, we have the react button at the bottom if you want to use an emoji to at least raise a hand, or maybe it only will be a heart. I'm not sure. We'll find out. But also you can throw it in the chat if that makes it easier to ask questions. I want to be quick to chat. I can throw a question for Nate. Maybe I'll give it a minute. I was rushed to talk. I see Carl's coming off mute.
Yeah, but I was thinking how to ask the question. Hi, Nate. Very, very good. Enjoyed the presentation. We've been engaged in a Trail Town exercise with multiple communities over the last 5-6 years. And one of the things that we try to do is understand the market and understand the demand. And I think a lot of communities, and we're in a very rural area, and typically someone sets up a business, or they're looking at traffic counts, they're looking at specific statistics that help to support the investment. So are there any tools that you found, or great ways to do that to help the community understand, here's what the needs are, here's the needs are, and here's what the demand could be in your location?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things. So I would say there is a great tool that is good for both understanding your sort of baseline, but also how things are changing over time, called placer.ai. Some of y'all might be familiar with that, but I'm always pretty impressed with the types of data that it's able to give you. It can break down everything from like, are these folks that are in it tells you basically the numbers of who is where in your town, in your public space, at a pretty granular level, like down to the business level. But it also breaks it down by, are these folks likely residents? Are they visitors? Are they workers who are coming into town just on their commute? And you can track it again, like throughout the day, throughout the year. It's really, really granular data. So that can be quite helpful. I also would say that to a certain extent, it depends on the improvement that you're talking about, but sometimes it's best to just test, right? Get out there, even if you don't have all the information, try to find a lighter, quicker, cheaper way to test out an idea and see if there's demand. Because even if you do all of the you know, surveying in the world, sometimes people will tell you one thing and they'll do another thing. So I think don't necessarily let a lack of data prevent you from testing out an idea if you have a hunch.
Thanks.
All right, we did get one in the chat. I'm going to read it out loud so everyone can see it. This is from Allison Piedmont. On a historic property where there are certain limitations on what you're able to do with the space due to respect for architecture and history, preservation limitations, how would you approach improving public spaces like that?
It's a good question. I think it depends a little bit on what the limitations are specifically. But I think that, you know, again, there are a lot of fairly tactical ways that you can improve a public space that don't necessarily involve major changes to the hardscape or the building or the landscape, right? So things like, you know, would movable furniture be allowed, for example, right? You can do a lot of programming in the space. If you have someone that's actually caring for the property, that's a huge leg up. That's a massive advantage in terms of actually activating the space, because it means you can put things out temporarily, take them away. You can host events. You can, you know, keep the space maintained. Like those are all real assets when you're thinking about a historic property. You don't necessarily need to make major changes to the actual landscape in order to make it work. So hopefully that's helpful. But if you have any specific limitations you're dealing with, happy to dig into that more.
Somebody raised their hand, but Zoom's not telling me who. Oh,
It's Andy.
Go for it.
Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, hi. I was wondering, Andy with New York State Parks. I guess I just put it in the chat too. I just specifically was wondering if, you know, the design stage usually I see a lot of under design as far as placemaking, right? So throw a few chairs, benches in. Have you seen, I mean, have you actually seen tools like yours or others integrated in design stages at this point?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. We do. So we do provide grants, but we also do fee-for-service consulting work. So in those instances, we often bake that into the design stage. And I think like probably the biggest difference is that when you integrate this into the design stage, you often end up with a much more flexible design. That's usually what the end result is it builds in room for experimentation after implementation. It builds in more room for programming. It builds in more flexibility for people to kind of remake the space themselves a little bit. Often public spaces are a little over-designed and under-resourced, in my experience, right? So because like once you put that bench is in, right? And so it doesn't leave you a lot of room to maneuver. So you better get it right the first time is kind of the thing. Whereas if you have the management capacity to have some seating options, then you know people will tell you what they want and how they want to use it a little bit.
Thank you. Great presentation too.
Dawn's curious if we can send the file of the questionnaire you share in your presentation. So that's the placemaking questionnaire, I think, Dawn, that you're referring to. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry, I meant to mention that in the presentation. I'm happy to share that through Rebecca so you all can have access to that, and as well as the deck, because it has a little bit more instruction on how to actually run that workshop that I sort of breezed through, but you can take a look at it. Also happy to talk via email.
Yeah, I'm going to turn around a follow-up pretty quickly, you know, with some of the resources that were mentioned today, including that booklet. And I do have a question. I'm curious, you know, we are encouraging people to congregate in these spaces. We're encouraging the sociability component. We all know that it's healthy and constructive. But what about people that might not necessarily agree? What if they're more wary of kind of setting up spaces where more people will be and what kind of activity that could generate? How do we talk to them? How do we open up their minds to how placemaking is positive and how it encourages collaboration?
So the objection being that people aren't really they don't want more people. Like they don't want it to be busier, louder, that type of thing.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is potentially setting up some of these things as an experiment of being like, we're gonna do this for X amount of time. We're gonna evaluate the results. We want you to be involved in the process of designing what we're gonna do, and we want your feedback when we get to the end of the test period, right? And sometimes that works, and sometimes it doesn't. At the there's a great example of this from Toronto, which is close to where I grew up, where they tried to do this with turning a major street in Toronto into a transit corridor, right? So more focus on walking and biking and transit, less on cars. Cars had to turn at every intersection. They couldn't go straight through, right? And so they did an incredible community engagement process. They were like, what do you want us to measure, right? We'll measure it and we'll follow up with you. They did all of that, all the good stuff that you want to do. But there was one business owner that hated it so much that he commissioned an ice sculpture of a giant middle finger and put it outside of his business facing the streetcar, right? And at the end of the day, look, they didn't convert that guy, right? They weren't able to convince him that this was a good idea, but they had a ton of proof that the rest of the community wanted it. They had a ton of proof that it did the things that they said that they were going to do. Again, they engaged all the business owners. They gave this guy an opportunity to engage, and they heard like sales. That's going to be an important metric for us as business owners. So they measured sales in the area. They were able to show that sales were up, right? And this guy was saying, no, I'm worried about sales going down, right? So it ended up being a PR battle, but they did their homework, right? So they actually had the evidence of engaging with the community, of data to say, we hear that this guy's saying this, but it's just, that's not the case, right? We have the data to back it up, and we did do the homework, and we do have the support. So sometimes that's the way community engagement works out, right? But it is important to do your homework.
For sure. Thank you, Nate. Thank you. So I do have some wrap up things, but I do want to give another minute or two for people still pondering questions.
I think the detractors are the ones that we're always running up against. You put a lot of effort and time, and the volunteers and the communities get discouraged very quickly when someone who may have a decision-making ability says, well, we've tried that before, or, well, that's not safe, or vandalism always occurs. We can't do nice things here. Like, what are some tools for those of us that are trying to take these ideas forward?
Yeah, great question. So again, I think often we encounter in the community, we often encounter those folks because our community engagement is too narrow. And so when we host just like the general public meetings that we often host, the folks that come out are the people who feel passionately, and many of them feel passionately in a negative way. And so those voices get elevated. But when you go to people where they already are at a community event or an everyday place, and you gather that input and that data from those folks in that way, or you challenge people to engage in a constructive way instead of only voicing their opinion, you can start to break down some of the detractors, I think, in that process. It is a little tougher actually with internal stakeholders, I would say, because people do have their experiences, and they're not wrong often that, like, yes, there is a track record there. But again, I think I do think that experimental framing can sometimes help, being like, we hear you, we know this hasn't worked in the past, but we do want to try it, and here's how it's going to be a little different this time. We're going to evaluate it. We're going to keep resources minimal, but let's try it out. Let's see if it'll be different this time. Here's how it might be. But it's tough. It's tough. I do think that extensive community engagement may also help kind of build the case, right, of saying, look, there's huge support behind this.
All right, I'm gonna take a temperature check. That's also maybe a follow-up point to what Nate was saying. I feel like some of these conversations, they need to be rehad. It needs to be reiterated. Having one community engagement session might not be enough. Multiple conversations with different stakeholders, and as Nate said, showing up where they are is huge. I know I can speak to a lot of, the communities on these call in particular are hosting great events. You have some kind of really core events and programming that you're offering where you're drawing community members in and you're engaging with outside vendors. So just having conversations in different spaces outside of the space that you're kind of primarily operating in can be really important. That said, everyone can follow up with Nate if you have any additional questions, but I did wanted to just share just some upcoming grant opportunities and resources that will be available to you. I know there's so many, there's county officials, county planners on this call. We have municipal entities, we have friends groups, we have agency staff. I really liked Nate's imagery for that power of 10. Because it kind of really exemplifies exactly how everybody on this call can think of themselves in this like mutually beneficial symbiotic relationship. All the parks and counties and communities kind of talking about this topic. How can you all lean on each other to create spaces where people want to be? How can you attract and retain visitors? These are all really cool conversations you can continue to have, especially as it relates to making physical improvements. We have funding available to do some of these things. Obviously, as Nate pointed out, and as Andy is speaking to, and we know that there's a lot of layers of communication, a lot of players involved in order to make these decisions. You're not new to the grant world. That said, Project for Public Spaces opportunity sounds like a wonderful one, and I hope some of you take advantage of this. In the follow-up, we'll include some more specific information about that grant and how to apply. Same for Parks and Trails New York. Parks and Trails New York will be opening up our grant round in 2026 around January 16th. So that'll be 60,000 in competitive grants. A lot of you on the call have taken advantage of that. There's a particular geographic range, so you can always follow up with me or others if you have questions if you're eligible. New York State Canal Corporation also has 2 competitive grants available. These grants are primarily for communities, or all for communities in the Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor, but those grants are open on October 14th, so in just about a month. They'll support infrastructure, tourism, events. I know that they have 2 workshops that I wanted to plug coming up in just about a week. So again, the turnaround on this webinar follow-up, I'm thinking will be pretty quick. Just so you can take advantage of those workshops if you want to learn more about those grants. Obviously, for our friends on this call, Park and Trail Partnership grants are available to you. So taking advantage of these grants and kind of thinking about the subject matter that Nate talked about today, not overthinking it, how are we all placemaking collectively? What do those improvements look like? And then some resources. The resources available again that I'll mention are primarily for canal side communities. We work a lot along the Erie Canalway Trail, but I think for any county friends group that's not along that corridor, I think that these resources will help inspire some idea generation at the very least. So we have the 2026 Empire State Trail Town program starting at the beginning of 2026. So for any community that wants to work with PTNY on a lot of the things that Nate's talking about, that placemaking workshop, evaluating how your community functions and what amenities, services, and assets you already have that are working really well. What can you do better? And how are you leveraging visitation from the Erie Canalway Trail to attract more people into your community? So application period will be opening at the end of this year. Apply, we'd love to work with you. For the amenities and kind of evaluating project ideas, I know that Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor recently did an amenities study along the Erie Canalway Trail, from benches and charging stations to restrooms, et cetera. Where are the gaps? So you can evaluate this document to determine are there any needs identified within your particular community. And again, for communities not along the Erie, it's more just about the subject matter and like the things that we would deem a vital service or amenity for any user. New York State Canal Corporation, one of our big sponsors and partners, has been hard at work. They just released their Recreation Way plan. This kind of forecasts into the future as what they see, what the vision is for both the waterway and the land trail. Again, so more for just inspiration to see where at least one agency is kind of headed in terms of their thinking and the improvements, programs, et cetera, that they'd like to administer. And in that same vein, they now have a canal design standards document that they are promoting. This is really to help kind of build that brand identity along the Canalway Trail. They're establishing some consistency among canal communities and improving that cohesion piece. So that's huge. Again, I know a lot of these resources are specific to the Erie, but we're happy to chat and kind of crowdsource more resources that might be more broadly applicable. I know there's plenty of folks on the call today that are not necessarily along that corridor, but I know we've thrown a lot of information at you today, so keep an eye out for a follow-up with a lot of links, PDFs, dates, numbers. And then I hope we can kind of grow on this topic. I hope we're all continuing to have conversations about it, and we look forward to seeing you in our public spaces. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.